Hey there! As some of you may or may not know, the War Within actually features a large amount of half-elf lore. This video will have some light story spoilers for the War Within, so if you're trying to steer clear of everything for the coming expansion, then come back to this video after the pack launches. But anywho, for some background information, half-elves in general are typically the offspring of Thalassian elves and humans. Some fantasy universes have half-elves being anyone with mixed ancestry, even if it's a bit distant, like D&D and even the Bretons in Skyrim. So far, the only half-elves we've seen within World of Warcraft are Arathi, the son of Illyria Windrunner, and Turalyon, although technically Caligos' visage form is that of a half-elf as well. Up until now, we've been told that the half-elves are pretty rare in the world, and most, if not all, half-elves come from high elves instead of blood elves. This is true with the half-elves that we'll be seeing in the War Within. A long time ago, a group of high elves who taught magic to humans would actually venture off with humans from the kingdom of Arathi. It is speculated that this group of elves and humans would travel to and settle the continent of Avaloran, that has been hinted about in Dragonflight. It is currently protected by what I could only really describe as like a Bermuda Triangle kind of phenomenon on the other side of Azeroth. Over time, the humans and elves would intermingle to turn their entire population that we know about into half-elves. These half-elves specifically are more so in the vein of D&D and Skyrim, where they don't all have a direct elven parent, but they've got elven and human DNA mixed into them. We know this thanks to Laranai Fane, whom we meet in Hammerfall. We also know that these half-elves just prefer to call themselves Arathi, with pretty much everyone in Hammerfall that we meet being a half-elf. A key thing to note as well is that while the Hammerfall Arathi are our friends, it is most likely that the Arathi Empire itself, or the Empire of Light, will be a relatively large threat and villain. Arathi elves do not like outsiders at all, only really tolerating us as the player because they're kind of out of options. They also strictly hate the Void for the most part in the society, and as I mentioned a second ago, the Arathi only befriend us because they don't really have the option to be picky. They've been stuck in Hammerfall for about 15 years by the point that we get there. Interestingly enough, it seems that these elves are also going to be bringing back some of the original High Elven lore. Modern High Elves and Blood Elves don't really talk about their religion much, and they are assumed to be largely agnostic. However, originally, they worshipped the god opposite of Elune, their god being Balor or Balore, the sun god. This is something that we can hear a little bit about in-game still, as the Blood Elves will often say a new Balore Delanar in lines such as, "The Eternal Sun guides you." Not to mention that even before the light was even part of their magic as a whole, they had chose to name their new mini-well of eternity, basically, the Sunwell. And I know that Blood Elf Paladins and Blood Elves in the Light are kind of iconic at this point in the universe. They actually, for the most part, didn't use the light until the Blood Knights started to siphon it away from Naru. But this connection the Arathi have to the older lore mentioning Balor is the fact that the sun crystal that kind of allows for the night and day cycle that we are seeing in Hammerfall has actually been named Beladar in honor of Balore. We also know that their culture, as the story progresses, is going to have a lot of inspiration from the Spanish Inquisition that we had in real life. This is hinted to us a little bit by the fashion and architecture the Hammerfall Arathi seem to have, having a lot of Spanish just influence in general. But honestly, on top of that, the fact that their culture is very religious down there in Hammerfall with the light gives it an additional parallel to the Inquisition. But you don't have to take my word for that at all, or my even theory diving on the Spanish Inquisition connection, because Maria Hamilton spoke herself with Game Reactor and mentioned that Hammerfall itself was specifically inspired by Mexican sea notes, which honestly kind of furthers the connection. I mean, you've got a group of elves that use architecture and faction similar to Spain, and then you have confirmation that the entire zone that they're based out of is inspired by and designed based off of Mexico. This connection is also furthered in their overall appearance. Like a lot of Hispanic people, the Arathi come in a variety of skin colors from more white to more dark, with the average Arathi seemingly being more of a tanned color. Taking inspiration from real-world cultures is nothing new to WoW, and they often will merge several cultures together and spruce in additional twists to make them a bit more fantasy-like. One such example is the Volpera, who are seemingly a combination of Romani and Japanese cultures on an aesthetic level, but this doesn't define the Volpera themselves as a people within the Warcraft universe. The same can be said for the Nightborn, who have a very heavy French influence in their names and cultural connection with wine. Something many in the community have already noticed, though, is that this expansion seems rife with the possibility of allied races, with the Earthen coming at launch and the Hairnir likely coming sometime during the second raid tier or right at the start of the third one. It begs the question, will Arathi become playable in some form? Well, as of right now, we know that pointed ears for humans and Kultiran humans have been data mined. We also know that rounded ear options have been data mined for both Blood Elves and Void Elves, meaning it's a high possibility that at the very least, Arathi ear options will become an account-wide unlock at some point in the War Within. And if you max out the Hallowfall Renown track, you'll also be able to give your characters the Lamplighter title, with Lamplighters being an important part of the day-to-day lives of the Arathi in Hallowfall, keeping their people safe from void-based enemies and creatures that spawn when Beladar enters its dark phase. With that all being said, what do you guys think of the Arathi Half Elves so far, and are you excited to see how their story plays out in the World Soul Saga? After all, Midnight is all about reuniting various elven types, so we could see these guys appear again in Midnight. They are half elves after all.